In the frozen wastes of Siberia, there are places where the past doesn't just whisper, it shouts. And sometimes it shouts with a mouth full of flowers. Because among the most bizarre deaths ever frozen in time is that of a woolly mammoth, discovered with an entire meal still sitting in its mouth. Buttercups, grass, seeds, perfectly intact. As if it had paused mid-lunch and never got the chance to finish chewing. At first glance, it almost looks staged. A museum diorama where someone stuffed a prehistoric elephant with fake food. But no, this really happened. And it wasn't just one mammoth. Over the last century, Russian reindeer herders, gold miners, and paleontologists have unearthed dozens of Ice Age giants from the permafrost. Many preserved so exquisitely that their flesh, skin, and even internal organs are still recognizable. In fact, when the Berezovka mammoth was unearthed in 1901, the carcass was so fresh that local dogs reportedly tried to eat it. Which raises the question, how exactly does an animal the size of a double-decker bus go from grazing peacefully to being flash-frozen in ice so quickly that its stomach contents are preserved for 40,000 years? The answer, of course, isn't simple. And that's where the bizarre part comes in. The leading theory is that these mammoths were victims of catastrophic climate shifts, sudden plunges in temperature during the Pleistocene. Imagine this. One moment, a herd of mammoths is foraging on grassy tundra under a cold but stable sky. The next, a freak storm sweeps across the steppe. Temperatures plummet in hours, not days. The ground beneath them turns into sucking mud, then freezes solid like concrete. A creature weighing 6 tons is trapped instantly. The Siberian permafrost is like a natural cryogenic chamber. And when an animal dies in those conditions, its body is sealed against decay. Bacteria can't function, scavengers can't reach it. Which is why some mammoths have been found with liquid blood still inside their veins, frozen mid-pump. But the strange thing isn't just that they froze. It's how abrupt their deaths appear to have been. Some mammoths have fractured bones, as if they fell into sinkholes or were knocked over by landslides. Others seem to have suffocated, their lungs clogged with silt. And then there are the ones with food still between their teeth, like our buttercup-chewing friend. Animals that clearly weren't starving, sick, or old. They were in their prime, healthy, and then gone. It's so strange that some early scientists back in the 19th and 20th centuries floated wild theories. Maybe the Earth shifted on its axis overnight, plunging lush grasslands into an instant deep freeze. Maybe comets triggered atmospheric disasters. Even today, conspiracy forums like to recycle these ideas, claiming mammoths prove the planet can snap into ice age in a single day. The reality is probably less cinematic, but no less brutal. Ice cores show that during the last glacial maximum, weather systems could swing violently. A sudden flood from a melting glacier, followed by an equally sudden freeze, could doom whole herds. Essentially, they died not in one single global catastrophe, but in a series of freak local disasters. The kind of 1 in a million bad days that nature specializes in. Still, there's something haunting about looking at these creatures, preserved mid-meal, their last breath still locked in their lungs. It's a kind of time capsule no one asked for, proof that even the mightiest Ice Age giants could be undone in the blink of an eye. Because in the end, the bizarre thing about the mammoths isn't that they went extinct. That happens to species all the time. The bizarre thing is that some of them are still here with us, not alive, but suspended. Half-eaten lunches, half-chewed flowers, frozen mid-bite, a reminder that death too can be preserved in perfect, chilling detail. In the summer of 79 AD, the people of Pompeii woke up to an ordinary day. By the end of it, Many of them would be frozen in time, literally. When Mount Vesuvius erupted, it didn't just bury a city, it preserved one. Entire streets, temples, bakeries, even graffiti on the walls, sealed under layers of ash. But the most haunting part? The people themselves. When excavators began digging in the 18th century, they found voids in the hardened ash, hollow spaces where human bodies had once been. The corpses had long since decayed, but their shapes remained, outlines of arms, faces, even folds of clothing. Archaeologists realized they could pour plaster into these voids, and when the ash was peeled away, what emerged were human beings, frozen in their final, agonizing moments. Some are crouched in corners, hands over their mouths. Others lie twisted on the ground as if mid-fall. A mother shields her child. A guard still grips his sword. A dog, chained, contorted in the throes of its last struggle. These are not statues. They are the shadows of real people. People who thought they had one more breath, one more second, and didn't. Now, the bizarre thing about Pompeii isn't just that the people died, it's how they died. For a long time, the assumption was simple. They were suffocated by ash. But modern studies show a more complex and more gruesome story. Thermal analysis of bone collagen suggests that many victims were killed not by choking, but by heat. Temperatures in the pyroclastic surge that rolled over Pompeii could have exceeded 300 degrees Celsius, 572 degrees Fahrenheit. At that heat, soft tissues vaporize instantly, which means many Pompeians were essentially flash-cooked, their bodies turning to husks before they hit the ground. That's why some plaster casts show people frozen mid-scream, because their muscles contracted in death. But not everyone died in the same way. Some clearly tried to flee, only to collapse in the open streets. Others took shelter indoors, where collapsing roofs crushed them. And then there are those who may have survived the first wave, only to be buried alive as the ash kept falling, layer by suffocating layer. One man, discovered in 2018, was found face down with his legs crushed by a massive stone block. He had likely survived the eruption, only to be flattened while trying to escape. Talk about bad luck. What makes Pompeii unique is that it captured a range of human reactions to disaster: denial, panic, defiance. In Herculaneum, another city nearby, around 300 people were found huddled in boathouses by the sea, clutching each other as if waiting for rescue that never came. In Pompeii itself, some were found with valuables clutched in their hands, suggesting they thought they could outrun a volcano while carrying jewelry. Others seemed to have accepted their fate, lying down peacefully as the ash covered them. It's these details that make Pompeii not just an archaeological site, but a time capsule of fear. We don't just know how people lived. We see exactly how they died. Their deaths were undignified, random, and bizarrely theatrical, preserved like a stage play that never ended. And here's the kicker: Vesuvius is still active. Scientists estimate another eruption could happen within our lifetimes. Millions of people now live in its shadow, building homes on the same fertile soil that betrayed the ancients. Which means that Pompeii isn't just a frozen tragedy of the past, it's also a preview, a reminder that sometimes the strangest part of history is how easily it can repeat. Because while time has a way of erasing most deaths, Pompeii locked its victims into eternity, mid-step, mid-scream, mid-life. The most haunting shadows ever cast by fire and ash. If Pompeii captured death in fire, then Northern Europe captured it in mud. And not just any mud, peat bogs. Scattered across Denmark, Ireland, Germany, and the Netherlands, bogs have yielded some of the strangest time capsules in history. Human bodies, thousands of years old. Preserved so perfectly, you could almost mistake them for the victims of a crime scene last week. The most famous of them all is the Tollund Man, discovered in 1950 by peat cutters in Denmark. When they first saw his face, they thought they'd stumbled on a recent murder. His skin was still intact, his stubble still visible, his eyes peacefully closed, as if asleep. The only giveaway was the leather noose around his neck. And Tollund Man was far from alone. Across Europe, archaeologists have uncovered dozens of these so-called bog bodies. Men, women, even children. All preserved by the bog's unique chemistry. The sphagnum moss releases acid, tanning the skin like leather. Oxygen levels are low, bacteria can't function, and decomposition simply stops. The result is eerily lifelike corpses, hair, nails, fingerprints, and sometimes even last meals sitting in their stomachs. And those last meals? They're as bizarre as the deaths themselves. One bog body in Denmark had eaten a porridge of seeds and grains right before he died. Scientists can tell you the recipe, right down to the weeds mixed in. Another still had mistletoe pollen in her gut, suggesting she died in spring. These are details we rarely get in archaeology. Death frozen not just in body, but in context. High in the Andes, where the air is thin and the cold can bite through bone, lies one of the most hauntingly preserved deaths in human history. A child, no older than 12 or 13, still dressed in fine Inca clothing, her skin leathery but intact, her hair braided, her face eerily peaceful, as if she were simply napping on the mountaintop. She is known as Juanita, the Ice Maiden, discovered in 1995 near the summit of Mount Amparo in Peru. But she is not alone. Over the years, archaeologists have uncovered dozens of similar bodies across the high Andes, children frozen in time for over 5 centuries. And here's the bizarre part. These children didn't die by accident. They were sacrificed. The Inca practiced what's known as capacocha, a ritual offering to the gods. When times were dire, drought, famine, volcanic eruptions, the Inca believed they had to give their most precious gifts. And what's more precious than a child? Selected for their beauty or purity, these children were paraded through the empire, honored with feasts and ceremonies, before being led up into the mountains. There, priests gave them coca leaves to numb them, alcohol to sedate them, and then left them, alone in the thin freezing air, buried in small stone tombs. They would fall asleep, their bodies would cool, and the mountains, merciless and unyielding, would finish the work. It sounds horrific to us, and it was. But for the Inca, this wasn't seen as cruelty. These children weren't victims, but envoys. Their deaths weren't endings, but transitions, messengers sent to live forever with the gods of the mountains, the Appas. What makes their fate so strange today isn't just the ritual. It's the way the ice preserved every detail. Juanita's body, for instance, still carries bruises from a blow to the head, suggesting she may have been struck unconscious before freezing. Another child, the Ice Maiden, found in Argentina, still has lice in her hair, fingerprints on her skin, and the residue of coca leaves in her mouth. It's not just their faces that survived. It's their stories written in tissue and bone. Fast forward from the Andes to the Arctic, and we find another group of people whose deaths were preserved in ice. But this time not as honored sacrifices. More like a cautionary tale in what not to pack for dinner. In 1845, Sir John Franklin set sail from England with 2 ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, and 129 men. Their mission was to chart the last unclaimed passage through the Arctic. They were prepared, or so they thought. Coal, canned food, even a miniature library. Victorian exploration at its finest. And then, nothing. The ships vanished. For years, the Franklin expedition became one of history's great mysteries. What happened to them? Where did they go? Why did no one return? The answers began to surface in the late 20th century when archaeologists uncovered the bodies of 3 young sailors buried on Beechey Island. Despite being dead for over 140 years, their faces looked as if they had been sleeping under the snow for only days. Eyelashes, skin, even the expression of pain etched into their lips, preserved by the Arctic permafrost. Which brings us to the bizarre part. These weren't ordinary deaths. Autopsies revealed shocking details. The men had toxic levels of lead in their bones and soft tissue. The source? Their food supplies? Specifically, the canned rations. Early tin cans were sealed with lead solder, and the metal had leached into their meals. So instead of nourishing them, their dinner was slowly poisoning them. Headaches, confusion, organ failure. Not exactly the survival kit they had in mind, but lead poisoning wasn't the only horror. As more remains were found scattered along King William Island, evidence showed starvation set in. Some bones bore cut marks, grim signs of cannibalism. If the Arctic froze its victims in ice, then Los Angeles froze them in tar. Yes, sunny California is home to one of the strangest graveyards on Earth, the Brea Tar Pits. From the outside, the tar pits don't look like much, just dark pools of asphalt bubbling in the middle of a modern city. But for tens of thousands of years, these pits were death traps, and the fossils they've given up show some of the most bizarre frozen moments in the prehistoric record. Here's how it worked. Picture a giant sloth or a bison wandering across the plains, lured by the smell of water. It steps onto what looks like a solid patch of ground, but it isn't. It's tar, sticky, heavy, inescapable. The animal sinks, struggling, thrashing, crying out. That sound attracts predators. Saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, even birds of prey. They rush in, thinking they found an easy meal, and they get stuck too. The result? A pileup of death, frozen mid-struggle, preserved for eternity. At La Brea, paleontologists have uncovered entire scenes like this. Predators locked onto prey, jaws open, claws extended, all pulled down together into the black goo. It's like a natural crime scene where every character died in the middle of the fight. And the numbers are staggering. Over 5 million fossils have been pulled from the tar pits. Dire wolves by the hundreds, saber-tooths by the dozens, mammoths, ground sloths, camels, even a preserved American lion. And then there are the oddities, things you wouldn't expect to see stuck in tar. Giant condors, rabbits, even insects. If it lived in Ice Age California, chances are at least a few of them ended up in La Brea's sticky embrace. But here's where it gets bizarre. Unlike Pompeii or the Andes mummies, these deaths weren't sudden. They were slow, very slow. Struggling animals could take hours, even days, to sink. So what do mammoths, Pompeians, bog bodies, Inca children, Arctic sailors, and saber-toothed cats all have in common? They all remind us that death isn't always quiet. Sometimes it's loud, messy, bizarre, and, if nature decides, perfectly preserved for thousands of years. The woolly mammoth caught mid-bite shows us how suddenly the Ice Age could turn from feast to fatal freeze. The people of Pompeii, frozen mid-scream, reveal how a single day of fire can echo across millennia. If you enjoyed this descent into ancient strangeness, hit subscribe to Before Scrolls for more journeys into the raw, unfiltered past. Leave a comment below. Which frozen moment shocked you the most? We'll see you next time. Maybe, if we survive, if we survive, if we survive, if we survive.